Hey there, it's Andrea, and welcome to the Voice of Influence podcast. Today I have with me Dr. Karalee Picard. She is a distinguished organizational and leadership expert with a unique background in defense intelligence. She honed her skills in making critical decisions with limited information about complex, multifaceted problem sets. And we talked about this a little bit in the first episode that we did together, and we'll link to that in the show notes. As a seasoned coach and board leader, Karalee brings a wealth of experience in guiding individuals and teams to achieve their highest potential. Her exceptional ability to listen and understand diverse perspectives has made her a sought-after advisor and mentor. And Karalee will soon be releasing her first book, Stand Up, Don't Stand Alone, creating a workplace where every voice is heard and every action matters. Karalee, congratulations on the book and welcome to the Voice of Influence podcast.
Thank you, Andrea. It's so nice to be back here.
Yeah, so you have been busy since we talked last, and your book is nearly ready to be published. Can you give us the basic message in a snapshot and then why this message?
Sure. I've worked in bureaucracies my whole life, my adult life, from the Navy and the DoD, and I've seen pockets of bad behavior, toxic environments, but I've also seen really great environments. And when I did my dissertation, I was studying these kinds of organizational cultures in deep or steep bureaucracies. So what I found was that where people worked on their culture, things were pretty good, but it was where nobody talked about how they were going to hold each other accountable, how they were going to give and receive feedback, where they actively worked on their traditions and norms and upholding policies, etc. So I started working on workshops. I created a workshop to build culture from the bottom up. And I've run that a few times. And what I found was that it's working great. One of the first organizations I did it with was a team of about 20 people. And it's been about almost a year and a half since we did that. And they can't wait to do it again because they've gotten new members. And I gave them what each team gets is a poster. It's visible in the workplace and they can talk about it when people come in, and other people coming and going are interested in what is this all about. So what I found was, as I was talking to other people, they wanted to know about this. The employees did, but maybe the managers were like, well, we don't have time to do this. You know, we have a big mission for the Defense Department. We can't just be away from our desks. And so what I realized is what they needed was authorization from the top of the organization to step away from their desk, work on building their team, because building your team creates motivation, psychological safety, more innovative ideas, etc. And for a company, that would improve their bottom line, their profitability. So what I've done is then gone to the top of the organization and started a workshop with that level. And they are very interested. So I am hopeful that they will then create the authorization for time and any money needed to do this work from the bottom up and really get after their culture. So the motivation really was, I can see where we can solve some interpersonal office relationships and produce more and do better just by doing this simple work. And so that's kind of how the book was born.
Since we talked last, we explained what your background was, but I think it might be important for us to just touch on again. So your experience in the bureaucracies, what did that look like, or what was your role?
I had many roles. From when I was in the Navy, I was there for 10 years, deployed on a ship. A lot of bad behaviors were just swept under the rug. Sexual harassment, horrible language that was used, belittling. And whenever I would raise those issues, my boss would just say, no, don't worry about that. It's fine. That person is fine. Whether it happened to me or not, oftentimes I was just reporting it happened to somebody else and I wanted to take action. And they were like, no, we don't need to bother with that. And then I saw it in pockets in the DoD. And it's really hard for people to pinpoint oftentimes what it is they're complaining about, and in a legal sense, right? So I guess my experience with getting to this point has been, I know that people are filing equal employment opportunity complaints against their supervisors, not just in DoD, across the government. And I hear people from the corporate world and some in the nonprofit world who are having similar issues, and they don't really know what to do with it. So in my perspective, that's a huge legal battle that nobody ever has enough money to tackle. And what we could do instead is just try to create the culture that we want and that our people deserve. And that's
more
my
proactive.
Yes, more proactive. Let's be proactive in this. It's the 21st century. The world is moving really fast, and we can get ahead of this if we do some of this work.
Can you describe for us? I know there's a few different levels of culture that you talk about in your book.
Yeah.
Can you share with us what those levels are?
Yes. I've come up with a couple ideas. The first one was an iceberg. I built an iceberg to say, look, here's the piece above the water is what we see on a website or when we show up at a new job. Underneath the water is less visible, like communication styles, leadership behaviors, work-life balance, the informal hierarchy. And then there's an invisible layer of discipline, how policies are implemented, relationships, people's biases, clearly often hidden, unconscious, the feelings we have about the workplace, and trust. Psychological safety is at the very bottom. But what I realized was that wasn't complex enough. So I created a new model, which is about the banyan tree. Do you know about this tree from Asia? It's spread around the world, but it originated in Southeast Asia. Very large. The largest two that are known in the world one of them's in Indonesia. It's about 3 football fields in size, in acreage.
Wow.
Because it's basically one trunk, and as it grows up, the limbs drop roots, and those get roots. So there's still only one trunk of this 3 football field tree. But all of those roots, they all go to the ground. In amongst that, there are creatures living, bugs, whole little ecosystems of things happening in there. That's more complex. And then there's the entire root system of things that are hidden, absolutely invisible, we can't get to. And that's a better model. I can share that picture with you if you want. That really speaks to how complex culture is. The visible things you can see on a website, like I said, mission, vision, values. Some of their policies might come out in the types of words that they use when they describe those things, when they do the pictures that they have on their website. And then when you get into an organization, it's about the hierarchy, the org chart, how people dress, the language they use, and then all of those other hidden things below, even the traditions that people have, I would say, the work ethic, the authority, the informal structure I mentioned, but the expectations, how safety measures are implemented or ignored, that's less visible. And then again, way at the bottom, there's our deeply held beliefs, our personal values don't always show up at work. But what I'm finding in those workshops is that I ask them to do an exercise about their personal values first so they can get in the right mindset. And I said, you don't have to share those, but now think about the values you want in this team. So try to get them to connect some dots there. And then some people might find that their values don't match what the team ends up agreeing on. I haven't had a case like that yet, but it could happen. And then they might leave the team eventually because their values don't match. And that's okay, that's a decision. But other things like how we handle physical space, if I don't want somebody coming right into my cubicle if I have a small space, stay out there. Who gets in office, that's a thing. Notions of politeness, that's very hidden. Time, flexibility, who gets flexibility and who doesn't. Some of that is seen as retribution. So let's define those. Anyway, all of these things come out, but that's the model that I've come up with.
So
the banyan tree.
Yeah. So the invisible things are things that are maybe they're even unconscious, or they're things that they're kind of embedded in such a way that they're more motivational. They're the motive or the thing that drives, it sounds like.
Right. Some organizations have such deep hierarchical structure, and the leaders, especially in the military commands, those folks rotate every 2-3 years. They will see that hierarchical structure as the law, and that's fine. But what they don't understand, and this is what I found in my dissertation interviews for my study, was that there is a whole hierarchy below them that is invisible. And that's how things get done. And there are certain people who have power over what gets done and who gets to be invited to things and who gets to have a say that they don't even know about. And then the military leader will go and reorganize, and those people will just kind of hunker down and harden their positions without talking about it. And they'll do some visible changes because the boss has told them to.
Right.
But when that leader leaves, they'll come out of their shell and convince the next leader to change back.
Yeah. I've seen
It's
that similar dynamic even in schools where you have like
yeah,
a new superintendent or a new principal every once in a while, and people are like, whatever, we'll do what you want us to do, for a while, and we'll know that eventually you're leaving anyway. So it's a hard position to be in, to be that leader, but it's also hard to be the person that keeps seeing the leaders go and turn over.
yeah, yeah. And that is one thing that we need to accept, I think, when we work in organizations like that.
Mm.
It is hard because it takes that person a while to get their feet on the ground,
Mm-hmm.
know what people want them to know, and then make their own decisions. And what I found is that when you can create a group, kind of a cross-sectional group of the organization who understand the leader's vision
Mm-hmm.
for what they want done, then you have created champions who can answer all the questions
Yep.
of other members when they're getting coffee or when they're walking to a meeting, or you know I've done this many times, so I can tell you about a time when this worked back in 2010. And this is in a book. Back in 2010, I was asked to be the leader of a tiger team, which just means I helped select a cross section of people in our organization to study whether we needed to reorganize or not. And we had a new senior executive analyst who came in and had kind of directions from Defense Intelligence Headquarters to say, hey, that organization needs to adopt our new congressionally mandated tradecraft on how we do analysis. Okay, so that was his charge. And he also was finding that the leaders at our headquarters in Europe were not quite satisfied with how we were doing things. So my job was to coalesce this team of people to design a study. I did a survey, we did interviews with people, we gathered all the information. But what he did, what really at the beginning, was to tell us that we had his ear. Anytime we had a question, come in and ask him. If I needed him to reiterate to the whole group together, then he would do that. If I had a problem that I needed a bigger, longer answer from, let him know. Anyway, so we did this study and the surveys and gathered all the information, and he was happy with the results. He wasn't the decision maker, though, because again, bureaucracy. So we had to present this to the commander at the time. I'll say mini commander. He was an 06 colonel. And he wasn't ready for a reorganization. We saw a real need for it because we just weren't quite where we could have been. Anyway, he rejected the whole thing. He wasn't very happy that we even wasted his time, but he left. He retired after, I don't know, 6 months. And then a new person came in and he bought off on it. He knew why we needed to do it because he had fresh eyes.
Yeah.
And he had 2 or 3 years ahead of him to help this transition move forward. The biggest thing I think from that was the creation of the champions, because while we were the members of the Tiger team were in amongst our normal duties, meeting with people and hearing people talk, we could say, well, yeah, there is talk of a reorg, nothing's set in stone, but we're trying to implement new tradecraft standards. And, headquarters doesn't always read our work, they read other agencies' work, and we want them to know what we have to say about these topics. And so we could convince people, hey, you're an expert on, say, the Balkans or Turkey. could say, they really want to know what you have to say, but we have to say it in a succinct way because they only have a few minutes. You need to say everything you need in half a page. And so if we implement these standards, we could get there. So it was a little easier. There were still some people upset about it, but they ultimately agreed to it. They bought into it. They stayed.
Mm.
There were people that had been totally against it, but they ended up staying.
And the main
So
thing that
that's when
changed was the communication, and you said reorg too, right?
we had a massive reorg after that. There were divisions dismantled, new divisions organized. We had an extra layer or two of analytic, I would say bureaucracy, but analytic reviews.
Mm.
So more people were inserted in the chain. And it was all really to give, initially, it was to give the lower levels more time to think and research and write. And then we would do the reviews up ahead. And that has worked. But that was a long time ago. That's evolved many, many times. Creating champions in the workforce, I think, is so key if a leader wants to change things, something big.
Yeah. So why don't you share with us, like, what are a couple of traits or things that you need to do to create those champions?
First of all, you need to recognize that you need help in communicating. And part of it is making sure that your down chain knows that you're going to be talking to a lot of people about these initiatives. So there's a couple ways you can do it. You can either go down chain and kind of talk about it to various levels and say, I need you to ask me all the questions or help me figure out how we're going to go forward. And then also let people below you know that we're going to do this work and ask them to identify people who seem eager about it. And you can't task somebody. This is the thing. And I've run into this at another organization where they're like, oh, we'll just task people. We'll put it in their performance plan. That doesn't work because it has to be a natural thing. You have to have a conversation with people and see whose eyes light up. And it's like,
Yes.
oh, Andrea, you just raised your eyebrows. Let's talk later. You don't say that, but pull them aside later and you say, what intrigued you about that? And see if there would be somebody who believes in this initiative. Because that's the only way you're going to get somebody to talk about it positively.
Mm.
And then you create a comms channel to come back and forth. Look, if you don't mind, you could talk to other people about this when there's questions, or just mention amongst your working, your office, your team, that this might be coming. What concerns do they have? Or the top leader could, maybe they know some people that, like, look, I used to work, this happens in the military structure. I know this person from a previous job. I'm going to talk to them. They're going to be a champion, but probably multiple avenues.
And then the things that they need to be able to do would be able to, first of all, you talk about it, right?
Right.
You need to know the talking points.
Yes. You'd have to develop the talking points. And we didn't do that in 2010. It was just basically, mostly I was sitting in with the executive getting these things, but I had a few meetings with the Tiger team so they could document his words. He never wrote any of this down, but we just parroted his words to people. Yeah.
Good.
So that's the champions it's a big deal, but again, you can't task people to do it because you might task somebody who has their identity rooted in this organization and they don't want to change.
Then they could put the brakes on really hard.
And they'll be such resistors. Yeah. They'll find every way to resist it. Yeah. And there is a section on resistors in the book too, and a lot about champions. But mostly I spent time on the middle managers. Middle managers are so key to organizations and especially reorganizations because they know the processes, the people. They're the ones that can be champions if you've got a good relationship with them. They know everything about the organization, way more than the CEO or the military officer or the ED who's transient to a degree. Those middle managers stick around for a long time often.
Yeah.
And the senior SMEs, the senior subject matter experts who have been there a long time, they are invested in that mission. And they're also ones that you'd want to bring along into being a champion because they otherwise will resist it. They're going to just hunker down.
You talked about resistance. How does resistance really show up when you're wanting to make some sort of culture change?
What I've seen from resistors is silence or pushback, asking a lot of questions that they want details on immediately. How is this going to work? How is this going to work? Well, I don't know yet. Oftentimes it's I don't know yet because it's coming from the top down. Now, if it's change I'm making, I'm happy to brainstorm with them. Well, how do you think it can work? How can we make this successful? But if it's coming from the top down, it's usually, well, here's what I know, here's what I don't know. But there's always questions. They'll, start complaining to their colleagues. They'll not change. They'll not meet deadlines. I know one example where the individual really started being toxic in their own office. They were the manager of an office and they didn't like some changes that were coming down, and it caused a lot of other problems because they were so resistant that it caused problems with the people they were managing. I mean, there's many ways it could show up. They could quit. They could just call in sick. I had a period of time where that happened, where they just weren't showing up. It's not fun. But like I said, people especially people who've been there in their position in the middle or in subject matter expert positions for a long time, they identify so much with that. And they're proud oftentimes of where they've been and how they've come to the position they are in and their accomplishments. And then when you go to change something, it disrupts their world. And sometimes they might assume that their workday is going to change, in meaning that they might have to come in earlier or they might have to stay later. And so those things are probably really good topics to discuss up front. Look, yes, you're going to have to come in early one day a week because especially in the military organization, we like to do meetings at like 6 or 7. So sometimes that happens. But if the workday is not going to change and they're going to keep the same, even say they keep the same performance objectives, but it's the how they do their work is different. If you address those things up front, that would alleviate a lot of that resistance because then they're not scared. What they're scared of is that their day will change, and some people just want energy to go and play golf after work. And if their day has changed, then maybe they won't have the energy. It's all about the life balance too.
It seems like even if it's just, I just don't want to change because I don't want to have to think harder. I don't want to have to think outside what I'm already doing. I'm set in my ways. I've got a good process that I like. Yeah, there's problems, but I don't really want to have to deal with them. And so I think that's one of the things that concerns me. And I'm wondering, when you are thinking about trying to win those people over, how do you convince a person like that's in that position who doesn't want to have to put more energy and effort into their job, that it's worth putting more energy and effort into their job? And I mean in that sense of like, we're going to make a shift and we're going to make a change that's going to improve the way things function, but maybe they just don't want to worry about that. What are your thoughts on that?
That's true. That's hard. And that has to be individualized, tailored for every person. It's really about probably having those conversations to get at the root of the matter. And this is where coaching skills come in. I think every manager, everybody probably should be trained on coaching skills because they're really helpful to get at the root of the matter. How do you think this initiative will change your day? And then they can vocalize that. And that's when you can then respond, because not everybody's the same. Obviously, we're all different. We all have different life requirements and likes and dislikes. And so I think the only way to get after those instances is to have those kind of open-ended conversations. How do you think it's going to affect your day? How do you want to tackle this? Because this is of maybe short or maybe long-term effort. How can I best support you? What are you missing? If you ask them those open-ended questions, then they get to articulate their fears. The fear will come out. And they may not say they're afraid of change, but you can see it on their facial expression, hear it in their voice. They might slump in their chair, but it's picking up on those cues, active listening.
Mhm. Yeah. So you can see that that's the problem, but then getting them to actually care
Yeah.
is still an issue. It still can be, even if you know what it is, even if they
Yeah.
acknowledge that that's where they're at. Sometimes they can dig their heels in, and I've seen it, and so that's the reason why I'm
Yeah.
talking about this, because I know you said your book is talking about middle managers. So I guess you said it's individual, but I'm wondering, is there, are we trying to tap into, maybe they need to be inspired by the
Yeah.
vision. Maybe they need to see what they're experiencing as a bigger problem and seeing the stakes. Maybe, like what
Absolutely.
kinds of things like that do you notice help those folks to be able to move beyond where they're at?
You've absolutely hit the nail on the head. The leader of any change needs to create a sense of urgency where, hey, this is why we need to do this, and I need everybody involved. And in order to do that, you need to give them enough information or feedback on their part, especially if they're attached to the mission that they do,
Mm.
HR, IT, whatever it is. Your part in this is vital.
Mm.
I need you to do this for the mission. Don't say for you. If you don't, some managers and employees don't have the greatest relationship, but if you tie it to the mission, you're not doing this for me. I mean, if you have a great relationship, you could do that, but you could say, otherwise, and this happens in the government a lot. People join an organization because of the mission. So, like,
Yeah.
look, you are vital to this mission. And I've done this with HR and finance people because the mission of our organization is national security, and everything's about this big strategic mission. They don't see themselves in that. Like, I do HR. I, process some pay today. I do, they think it's very little. But if my messaging to them is that if you don't process the pay and approve the leave or the new performance objectives or whatever they're doing, if you don't process all these things for them, then they are distracted. The analysts, the targeteers, the planners, the operators, then they're distracted and they can't do their mission. So you are vital. We can't have those other people distracted. You have to do this
Right.
so that they can do their job.
Mm-hmm.
So in my mind, you could connect them. There's lots of ways to do this, and maybe longevity of an initiative. I think that is important to people. Is this short term? Is it
Yeah.
6 months?
Yeah.
Is it something that's not going to go away? Um, and in corporations, budget has a lot to do with some initiatives. But okay, we've got a great net profit right now. We're going to try some new things and see if we can make even more profit from this. But if that goes south, then they start cutting people or cutting other projects. So it all depends on how they envision the initiative that they're doing. And okay, you're going to have to work. You could say we need everyone to work really hard for the next 6 weeks, and then we're going to reevaluate. And people can put that in their minds, like,
Mm.
okay, I can do this for 6 weeks,
Right.
and it might continue because of our success, but at least then they have a timeline.
And it's going to be reevaluated. It's not just in perpetuity.
Right, right. Yeah,
For its effectiveness, because sometimes you start something and you're like, well, is this even worth it? But I think the reevaluation is super important, especially
exactly.
to communicate that it's going to be reevaluated, because then
Right.
people can kind of, oh, okay, all right, so at least we're trying this out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the other part of changing and getting people to accept or buy into it is that we need to realize that there's a learning process and there's an unlearning process
Mm.
that have to happen simultaneously. So when a corporation or organization changes something, they not only have to say, here's the new process that you need to learn, here's some training, here's some flyers on how to do the new process, and this is how it affects what you used to be doing.
Mm.
maybe something can, if software, one might go away and one might just be introduced. But if it's a process that involves several offices doing something, I think we need to acknowledge that there's some unlearning to do. Okay, you're not going to go to Bob first in that office. You're going to go to Susie in this other office. And some of that I don't think is often articulated. So
Yeah,
that's
that's
another
a
part.
really good point. Yeah. I wonder how people can plan for that. How do you identify what needs to be unlearned?
I think it's part of the change process that we have to acknowledge. In changing, we're going to miss something and we're going to have to adjust. And in that is the maybe part of the unlearning. The unlearning is going to come up. We just have to be ready to tackle it when it does.
So
So
kind
it's
of,
about being adaptive, agile.
yeah, and like
Yeah,
just being aware that it's going to happen and watch for it
right.
and name it. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you also talked about when we first started, you were talking about doing culture workshops with individual teams.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that I thought could be really impactful is the idea that the team creates its own culture. It can say what kind of team you want to be on. So tell me about why that is an important way to handle it, or why that could be another option to here's a culture, I need to fit into that culture, versus what you seem to be saying, which is here are the people, what is the culture of the people, and how do we make the most of that? And is
Yeah.
that what you're saying? Maybe that's not what you're saying.
Um, both, both really, because teams change. And so what I'm doing is creating a culture canvas, I call it,
Uh-huh.
and filling out all of the values, the purpose, the priorities, the behaviors, how we're going to run meetings, all these things, how we even define psychological safety. Every team is going to define it differently. And it's all based on who is present in that workshop.
Mm.
But what I've given to these teams is a report on the background of how we did the work, what the results were, and they can print that and give that to new members, talk them through. Look, this is what you can expect in this team. I
Mm.
also give them a poster of the same information, and it's often used to say, hey, boss, we agreed that we would be on time and prepared for meetings. And you mostly don't even need to say anything else because they probably know what you're talking about. So and so was not on time or prepared. You don't even, I've actually used that where I didn't have to say that person wasn't prepared or on time. I just pointed out that, hey, boss, we agreed to this. And we eyeball to eyeball, we're like, yeah. And he goes away and does whatever he does. But the purpose of that is to have a centerpiece to have conversations about. And it has the values clear, large in the middle of the poster, and the definitions are below. Some imagery connected to the organization. So it's definitely theirs. It can't be repurposed, but it's all based on who's in the room when they do the workshop. And then as they integrate people, when they onboard people, it's really valuable because those new folks immediately can learn how this team works, what they can expect, and then adapt. Now, the other piece, though, is when you get new people, which I think you were touching on, was I liken it to a tapestry that's being constantly woven, right? So the people in the organization, like originally, maybe 50 years ago, right?
Mm.
That's the original tapestry. But over the decades, as people come in and leave, one string is pulled out and a new one goes in. And so the colors are and textures are constantly changing. And I think acknowledging that we have to update our culture verbiage
Mm.
every so often. So the original team that I did the work with was about a year and a half ago. And now I think I told you, I've been asked to update that in a couple months when they get a few new members because there's been a lot of turnover.
Mhm.
And so in my mind, that's one reason to update it. Another reason might be that the mission has changed. Another reason could be just the leader of the organization has changed. And now they can see that this team had this culture canvas done, but wants to redo it to see if it's still valid,
Mm.
to see if that, that new leader could add something to it, or so they can best understand it. I mean, there's lots of reasons to redo it. There was also one team that I worked with, their larger organization restructured a bit. And so the team leader is now separate, but his group was broken up into two and he's separate. So I think one of those, I don't think he was taking it, but one of those smaller groups was going to take their culture canvas. And what I've told him is, we really need to just redo it because the rest of that team will not understand it. They can read the words and they can accept it, but they're not really going to get as passionate about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that's really a valid point because when you have new people, your team, the dynamics of your team, the makeup of your team, the feel of your team, the culture of your team naturally changes.
Right.
Yeah. So it makes sense to try to reevaluate and provide new language every once in a while.
And I found each team picks different language to describe their values. It's great.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah.
And none of them are wrong. They're all right. It's great.
It's fun.
Yeah.
So, Karalee, what else do you want to tell us about your book? Is there any other key message from your book that you want to make sure to touch on?
I believe that doing this work will improve any company's or organization's bottom line in terms of profitability, in terms of branding, like being the best place to work. The first team that I worked with is known as a great place to work. And I've not really heard that from another team. So I don't know if it's, I don't have enough data on that yet, but I think if we want to break down barriers, that I've done some work with inclusion and belonging, some diversity issues, but what I see this work doing is breaking down barriers because it kind of levels the playing field between manager and the team. The manager just has to be a participant in these workshops. And this really held true when I got our 2-star admiral to agree to this recently. I did a workshop with his team before Christmas, and I knew he was going to agree to this, but I met with him for a few minutes the day before and just said, okay, you agree that everybody has an equal voice? And he said, yes. Do you agree that we're all leaders? And because that's my philosophy, I usually say this to people. And he's like, yep, that works. And I said, so I'm not going to go through everything I'm going to say, but based on that, I think we're going to be in agreement. And so he then said something about how, well, you just feel free to cut me off if I talk too much. I was like, okay, I appreciate that. But I also need you to speak up when you see where an idea that I've introduced can be reiterated in a different way for your team. So please chime in and make sure there's connection between what I'm saying and what you want the team to hear. And so I think the barriers get broken down between the boss and the people in these workshops to a degree. Still, I'm talking about a deep bureaucracy that I mostly did this workshop in. But those barriers do get broken down. And one of the teams, I haven't finished the Admirals one yet, that'll be later this month, but one of the teams, they wanted in the decision-making section of the workshop, they said, well, we want to know more about the decisions and we want to have some say. Somebody said this. And so it was all on the board and just me talking about it. The manager was sitting there, but I said, well, just remember that our manager here gets the last say because we are in a chain of command where he has to make decisions. Now, he's agreeing right now in person that you will know more about the decisions, but that doesn't mean he's going to go with yours. And everybody nodded their heads. Yep, we know that. So it's those kinds of conversations that can kind of level the playing field. There's still somebody in the position as manager. They have to make decisions.
That's right.
But we can all talk about it. So I think some of those misconceptions.
So, Karalee, where can people find your book when it comes out? How can they know that it's coming out? Find you?
I will be putting more about it in the next few months on LinkedIn, and it'll end up being on Amazon for sure, and then on my website, insightlc.org. You can find more information about about all of that there.
Okay. And we'll definitely
Mm,
put those links in the show notes to your LinkedIn
wonderful.
and your website for sure. And so then I have one last question for you. Given where you're at right now and the message that you are focused on right now, what last piece of advice would you want to give somebody who wants to have a voice of influence?
I would say take action to create your culture. It doesn't take a lot of effort. I would also say that you can't do it alone. You need an outsider to come in and put the pieces together and let you just participate in the process. Yeah. And then your voice will be heard and everybody else's would too.
That's a good
Yeah.
point. Good point. Well, thank you so much for your voice of influence today, and in general. Thank you so much, Karalee. It was good to
Thank
talk to you
you.
again.
It was great to be on, Andrea. Nice to see you again.